let's continue with the agenda,
All right.
the Encointer vision first, then we can follow with counselors' questions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's Encointer is about dealing with real people, and that's what we just saw, right? So anyway, you still see my slides, I hope,
Yeah,
or
we do.
again? Okay. So let me go to the next slide. So what is the overall situation where Encointer wants to give an answer? We have 1.7 billion adults that are unbanked in the world. We have over a billion people which do not have a state-issued ID. And in terms of financial inclusion, blockchain claims to at least partially solve that problem. But as long as we have global transaction fees, that actually still excludes probably pretty much the same people. And then we have the economist Thomas Piketty, who has identified a law or a model that the return on capital always exceeds economic growth, which more or less says that we have a systematic diverging inequality because of the system design that we live in. That as long as this rule is true, this always means that if you start with capital, then you will always be better off than if you try to catch up with income. And that's what we try to tackle with Encointer, a very ambitious goal. So what are the goals of Encointer? We want to have a sustainable, inclusive economy, especially in terms of equal opportunity. And I think that's where our proposition can be agreed from left to right convictions, at least liberal ones, because equal opportunity, I think, is something that most people can agree to as a goal. But then it starts to get specific. The decentralization, we would like to decentralize money and digital personhood, so that everybody can participate. I don't think you're not the audience where I have to explain a lot about this. And then federalistic governance. I believe that decisions should be taken as low as possible, as close to the stakeholders of the decision as possible. So that means if we talk about local communities, then the communities should decide on matters that only regard this community, and this should not be decided on a higher level. So we have, as a solution to the problem that I stated, I want to propose universal basic income. And in that sense, this is just a claim that universal basic income will really contribute to solving these issues. But what are the boundary conditions here? If we have a decentralized on-permission blockchain and no requirement for state-issued ID, then we have significant challenges. And well, basically, we want to be sure that the universal basic income can only be claimed by humans and only once. And then comes the economic question of, okay, we just created a new coin. Why would it have real value? We give money to everybody. Why would this have value? And today I will only briefly touch the economic side. So it's more about the other topic, democracy, where we have a very similar problem. We want to ensure that only humans can vote and that they can vote exactly once. So the Encointer white paper proposes a solution to this challenge, and we leverage the fact that a person can only be in one place at one time. So this is what the protocol actually leverages. If you want to participate, you have to participate in randomized pseudonym key signing parties, and they all happen simultaneously all over the world. Well, not exactly simultaneously at high sun, because we don't want people to force people to meet at night. And these meetups are in groups of 3 to 12 people. So if a city, let's take Berlin, has such a community, then you need a lot of publicly accessible meetup points. And then you, as a user, you register for the next ceremony, and then you get randomly assigned to one of these meetup locations. And then we have this video that you can look here. That's the first actual meetup that we tested with our Android app. So far works well. Now, what can we do with this protocol? Because in a sense, we get the proof of location. So every 41 days, we know where somebody is, and this actually allows us to geographically bound a cryptocurrency, and that's a novelty. That's no other cryptocurrency that I know of can do that. So we can be sure that money can only be issued within a certain geographic location. Well, but the security of the network still is global. Okay, and now the economic side, I will only briefly go over it. So kind of as a reward for meetup attendance, you get issued a certain amount of units, which is your UBI. And then you also have demurrage. So money will be burned because we don't want a just inflationary money supply for a stationary economy with a static number of participants. We would like the money supply to be stable as well, and that's what we do with demurrage. So here we suggest that kind of the halving time of your balance is 1 year, which is pretty significant demurrage. But this also allows us to ensure that the universal basic income is of importance in respect to the overall money supply. But let me jump over the rest. Privacy is a big issue here, even more than just with money transfer, because people are actually committing to be at a certain place at a certain time in the future, and that is even more sensitive than just what kind of economic transactions do you want to do. So privacy is a big issue here. Scalability as well, and that's where you may know that I'm also involved with Substrate. So Substrate is kind of a building block of Encointer. So what we architecturally foresee is that we have Kusama as the root of trust, as kind of the security provider for the Encointer canary parachain, which shall be maybe a common good parachain, and then we will have side chains which are validated by trusted execution environments, and this gives us the scalability that we can really have hundreds, thousands of communities which all can scale themselves without interference from the other communities. And what this also allows us is that we can charge transaction fees with purchasing power adjustment, because if you pay transaction fees in the currency, in your local currency where you get the UBI from, then you can actually define fees in relation to the UBI. And that might be a very different real value in some developing nation than it is in Switzerland or wherever. Now, governance is a topic where we probably will have discussions afterwards. So as I said, we would like to leave certain governance issues to the communities themselves, like how much demurrage, how high is the UBI. So kind of the economic design should be left to the communities, because some might want more equality, others will care less, and so this should be open. Then we have a governance of the Encointer parachain, which has to cover kind of the global system, like the ceremony schedule, certain security parameters like meetup size, and other things. And we have Kusama's governance, which kind of grants the parachain slot, but will also have a say in what happens, and that's what we will have to discuss later, I think. In terms of maturity, we have a testnet running since June last year. We have apps deployed, Android, iOS, and so on. And here we have the sybil-defense demo, which has already been deployed on Rococo. But the demonstration actually wasn't on Rococo, so we demonstrated with kind of our own parachains. Now, I just want to briefly explain how sybil-defense with Encointer works. Let's take this person who has attended 4 of the last 5 ceremonies. So we're pretty sure this person only maintains one identity. And this person might want to interact with some other parachain, and this parachain might have a faucet, and they probably only want that each person can kind of an airdrop or something, you know. You want to have sybil-defense for that. So now our participant here sends requests funds from the faucet and supplies proof of attendance for the 4 of the last 5 ceremonies. That parachain will check these proofs against its own registry of already used proofs, and will then request a personhood uniqueness rating from the Encointer parachain. So, and the parachain will then say, yes, these proofs are all right, and the kind of the rating will be 4 of the 5, 4 of the last 5 ceremonies have been attended, and this is kind of your trust ratio. Because if you attended only 1 of 2, then this actually means that you could maintain 2 identities. And if you have 3 of 4, that means that 3 people could actually have 4 identities. So, you know, it's kind of the higher this rating, the better, of course. And then based on this information, the faucet drips, and we have demonstrated that in a little video here, in a little screencast, if you're interested. The roadmap, well, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but with the white paper, it started in 2018. We got several grants from the Web3 Foundation, from the Polkadot Treasury as well. We have worked with kind of Gitcoin grants as well, so to give out the work actually. And now, I mean, because of COVID, we didn't really push the go live, because it's kind of strange to say, hey, here is this new money system, and you have to meet 12 random people somewhere in your town while we have a lockdown. This is kind of just not the right moment. But now, as things are improving in a lot of countries, I think the time is actually good, because more and more people are talking about universal basic income, exactly because of COVID and its consequences. Then how would we launch such a parachain? We would first deploy a Gazelle-style parachain. So the 2 testnets, they are different in terms of privacy. So Gazelle is pure substrate, while the testnet Gantillon uses Substrate for privacy. And we would start with a plain substrate solution, and have a sudo in the Encointer association for the first phase. Then we will bootstrap a community here in Zurich, and that's just the community that I'm closest to, because I live here. Then we would onboard more communities, but in a permissioned way. So the problem is, if we do this unpermissioned in the first phase, we have the problem that anyone could just squat the whole globe, because they are mutually exclusive. You cannot have overlapping communities in the same meetup locations. Kind of, you cannot have that. So before we really, we need to develop a web of trust among different communities first, and this will evolve because of economical exchange between these communities. But until we have kind of a minimum amount of communities, we need to keep permissioning the onboarding, I believe. I'm open to suggestions. Then technically we would enable sidechains. That's what we are developing right now with Substrate, in order to have the necessary scalability properties and privacy properties. And then we would go to on-chain governance by electing an Encointer council. We would go unpermissioned over time and remove the sudo, and well, hand over root to the council, so to say. And eventually, so now we were talking about Kusama only, but eventually if we can show that our sybil-defense is of general interest, then it might make sense to deploy on Polkadot as well, and either as its own parachain or by some kind of bridging. Now, Joe assembled kind of the criteria for common good, and I'd like to comment on these. So the first statement is that there is a free rider problem for certain aspects that we would like to see on Kusama, and I believe that the sybil-defense that we can offer are actually such a thing, because it's potentially useful to many, and in that sense, we have exactly that problem where people might not contribute to a slot auction because it's kind of something so fundamental, and if someone pays, then everybody can ride along. So we have a free rider problem. The native token, obviously that is a condition, will be the KSM. And in terms of financing our endeavor, what I would propose is that we collect transaction fees on our own parachain, and these transaction fees will be used for operating expenses. But actually, thanks to the DOT grant that the Encointer Association got before the launch, we are actually, I would say, we have some decent runtime, even without earning money somewhere. Then the duplication is an important thing to understand. Proof of personhood, the way we use it as a sybil-defense, should be singular. So if there are two systems providing proof of personhood, then the problem could be that you can have a singular identity on one of the platforms and a singular identity on the other one, and whoop, you have two identities. So I will comment, if we talk about the alternatives, I will comment more on that. And then Joe also said that kind of governance should be handed over to Kusama, to the Kusama Council. That is where I cannot really agree to 100%, because I think governance matters of Encointer are very specific about kind of what we are doing on Encointer, and this might be overwhelming to the Kusama Council, who has a lot of more, let's say, fundamental things to decide. So it's kind of out of scope. Still, there should be some leverage, and well, the ultimate leverage is that the Kusama Council can unregister the Encointer parachain. So there is a leverage, but it could go beyond that in terms of Kusama governance could, for example, define the parachain fees for using the sybil-defense. We could something like that, but that is not really fleshed out, as you may realize. The alternatives are, I think the closest alternative is IDENA, which also works with pseudonym key signing parties, but they do it bilaterally and virtually. So while we demand physical presence, they just demand online presence at a certain time. And these could potentially be compatible if the meetups happen at the same time. So if the virtual meetups happen exactly at the same time where the others happen, but I mean, then we would have to geographically restrict IDENA as well, because we are talking about high sun. So it's not exactly simultaneous in Encointer. So it's not really easy. It will happen on the same day, but the problem is, yeah, it should really be at the same time. Then the other alternatives, we have, of course, KYC based solutions. Good Dollar is such a universal basic income project, which is based on state issued KYC. You may know the e-government solution in Zug is now based on ProCivis, and that's also based on a state issued ID. Kind of a verifiable credential which is issued by the state. And then we have a lot. I think most is happening in the social peer-to-peer verification space. So Bright ID is kind of a very known thing where you just attest your friends, and this is based on just the social trust in this network. Very similar is Circle's UBI, where you issue your own money, and if you accept the money from someone else, then this actually means you verify the unique identity of that other person, because you trust that other person not to have two accounts. Unitaire is also social verification of 5 people. You need 5 people to attest for you, and then there are a few others. There's also proof of attendance, which I would say is something like a federated social verification. So if you go to a certain event, you may get the event organizer may issue a verifiable credential that you have attended, and then if you combine that, you can get a certain kind of digital personhood. So these are the alternatives. I think the social P2P verification ones are fundamentally different in their security model. I don't see a way to combine these really, so that they are mutually exclusive. And IDENA is something, I would say, similar in concept. Yeah, that was it. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Alan. We can now open the room for counselors' questions. I would like to start with 2, if that's okay. The first one is, you mentioned in your proposal that Encointer enables democracy, right? So I was wondering if you could extend the concept a bit more there and explain a bit further, and what are the applications that can benefit from this particular element.
Yeah. I will start on the lowest level. So on the community itself, if we bootstrap this Zurich community, that starts with the first 12 people, which will be kind of the trusted setup of the Zurich community, right? So they should be publicly known and trustworthy. But then it grows, and then you have kind of equal voting powers for everybody, because we have Encointer itself has sybil-defense, so we can actually democratically vote on the matters of the local currency. So, for example, if we want to change the name, which is, or kind of the abbreviation or something, then we could have a vote in the community where each human that participated has the same weight. Then, as we have more communities, these communities will accept, or should accept, each other's currencies for exchange, for cross-community exchange somehow. And if they do, this actually is a proof that they trust each other, that the others are also following the rules. Because the attacker scenario is that someone launches a bot community in the middle of the Pacific. And we don't want them to have voting rights, right? So we need this kind of web of trust evolving. But once we have that, we could even have a trust rating where each community has a certain confidence level, and then we can have global democratic voting, and not only on Encointer, but thanks to that sybil-defense cross-chain mechanism, we could even allow Kusama relay chain to use that for democracy.
And my second question is, you mentioned that there will be a console for Encointer, so a console on the parachain and a console on relay chain. Can you specify the responsibilities that each will have, which I think you also talk in the proposal?
Yes. Well, this is something that actually the Kusama Council and us, we have to somehow agree on where is the border between each. I see that the Encointer Council should be a representation of the active communities, and actually decide on matters which really regard the protocol. So as I said, ceremony cycle, kind of the rules of how you obtain your proof of personhood on Encointer. And probably also technical things like when do we enable sidechains? Do we have to accept new trusted execution technologies, or maybe sooner or later go for zero knowledge, or I don't know. These are kind of the matters that I see that the Encointer Council should decide. And the Kusama Council, as I see it, should mainly decide on the interoperability aspect. So on kind of the Kusama Council could enforce a certain format of cross-chain messaging, such to ensure interoperability with other sidechains or the relay chain itself, and possibly also the economic model around it. So the fee, how much does another parachain have to pay for a sybil-defense kind of request? Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Counselors, any questions? I think it would be nice to touch Jam's question and idea on bulk assembly, and also Will has raised his hand. Let's start with Jam.
I don't remember which question you're referring to, but I was about to sort of ask about so because you plan to take transaction fees and plan to use Kusama as a native token on Encointer, and because Encointer plans to have a native council, is there any risk that at some point Encointer accumulates enough voting power on the relay chain to get rid of any safeguard there, any safeguard its own growth?
Wow. You're even more ambitious than I am. Okay. Well, theoretically, there is that risk, obviously. That is a risk which could easily be mitigated by having the Kusama Council decide on the fees. And I think, well, I don't think it is really plausible that fees will be that much of an income, that this risk is real. Because if the fees would be so high that this would be the case, no one would use the parachain. So I think this is kind of a very theoretical kind of attack.
Voting activity is really low, so if a parachain entity actor is voting actively, then it could have a lot of power.
True. Yes. True. I mean, if this is a concern, then I think we should consider kind of certain that Kusama Council has certain powers over the treasury, because that's what we actually could do. That's something that Joe suggested, by the way, that we could actually have a root call well, from the relay chain to the treasury, such that actually Kusama Council would have the power to spend treasury funds.
Actually, I meant that like a little bit more generally, like so I was giving the example of like how in Polkadot and Kusama, if you look at the origin for like what is declared more than half of council and can like spend treasury funds, then it's like either one of more than half of council or also like roots. So like a democracy referendum could still actually like pass a fund spending proposal from the treasury because a referendum would take on the origin of more than half of council. So I meant that like generally that like if there's like some Encointer council that's like governing the Encointer parachain, that's good for, in the sense that like the relay like it prevents kind of like the relay chain from becoming bloated with governance stuff in general. But that like the relay chain governance should be able to like basically supersede or match the power of like the Encointer council, so that like they could basically overrule it, but generally delegate like the day-to-day stuff to like Encointer locally.
I think this is actually would make a lot of sense, because ultimately Kusama Council has the leverage anyway to kind of enforce something happening on the Encointer parachain. Because I mean, if you threaten to deregister the parachain, this will be I would say significant leverage.
Yeah, but I think that's from the Kusama like root origin, so like full referendum. It's not the power of the council to do that.
Oh, okay. It's not the council, but it's the majority on Kusama. Okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Will, you raise your hand?
Yes, thank you. I do have a couple of questions, actually. The first one is, you mentioned that to avoid people participating in ceremonies simultaneously, you are making all these things at the same time. At the same time, you mentioned that to avoid the other side of the globe to have to participate at 3 a.m., you kind of adapt locally. So what prevents me from participating into two ceremonies, one in Berlin and one in Asia or wherever, at another time?
Yeah, I can. Let me show that. There is an issue that's clear. We have, sorry. Where are we? There. So imagine we are at the North Pole. You can attend as many meetups as you like during 24 hours. So that is why the poles are kind of a no-go. So we cannot provide local currencies at the poles, and the same applies at the dateline. Because at the dateline you could kind of cross it eastwards and then have a lot of time. But if you try to catch up high sun westwards, you're not going to make it. You're just practically not going to make it unless you are close enough to the poles.
Okay, so what are the options for these people? Because we're not talking about 3 people potentially. So if someone comes in this red area or the yellow area here, what do we tell them? How do they have an option?
I think right now we don't. And I mean, that's not the only people we have. We have to exclude kind of, because you need a mobile phone, or I mean, at least some, it doesn't need to be a smartphone necessarily, but you need a phone to do this interaction. This also excludes people, but it excludes a lot less people than the banking system or than the state ID system. So it appears that a lot more people have a phone than have a bank account.
Okay, I see.
But I have to say kind of sorry to these people, because by design, we cannot really solve that problem.
Yeah. I was about to say the issue with the phone is in many cases you can actually allow people to borrow a phone, to do things, and there are areas indeed where people cannot have access to a phone to do some, let's call it blockchain transactions, but they always can borrow a phone, or share a phone with 3 people. It's not the safest, but it's an option. But I'm assuming in your case, it's a no-go because you're really mapping identity and the device itself.
No, actually, well, it's not an identity. It's just a uniqueness. So if
unique, yeah.
I mean, you can participate with a different phone every time. You can have a new pseudonym for every new ceremony. That works. The problem is just if you have one phone per family, then you have one UBI per family. And borrowing a phone from someone probably doesn't work in the adopted scenario because then the other one will need the phone themselves to participate.
Mm-hmm. All right. I have another question actually related to fees and participation. So when using blockchains, and I don't know how your parachain will look like, but usually you have to pay a fee, whatever it is, per transaction. There are some transactions that are interesting for people. For example, staking is interesting. I stake, I pay a fee, and I know I'm going to earn money. So I have an incentive to actually pay this fee. Now, there are fees that are very boring, and they bring absolutely nothing, if I put it this way. One example is council, and that may be a reason why we don't have that much participation, because basically voting on the council costs money, and you could see it in a way that it brings nothing. You earn nothing from voting in the council. That's the same for the democracy. When there is a vote that is up, there is no real incentive for people to vote, beside, of course, getting the chain to go their way. If they want to go right or left and they vote and the chain goes this way, that's of course interesting. But in terms of identity and what you're proposing, there is an obvious benefit of being verified. I would love to be able to present this credential and say, hey, I'm a person, I can prove it, and so on. That's a benefit. But how do you see the involvement of people, especially when it comes to, as you mentioned, participating many times? Like being verified several times gives you a stronger verification than just doing it one time. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. How can you be sure that people will take the hassle of sending many transactions to be a good Encointer citizen versus people saying, you know what, I'm just going to send one, I'm going to get my ID verified, that's going to be good enough, and I don't want to hear about this thing anymore?
Well, a one-time participation is almost worthless because it will only serve you until the next ceremony. And then if you cannot, it's kind of the singularity depends on participation of a number of ceremonies in sequence and recent ceremonies. So I think I mean, on the bottom line, I cannot tell you if people will participate, because that's actually what we're trying to find out here. It's just, it appears to me that this physical presence thing might be even more bothersome than paying the fees. So you have to be somewhere.
I agree. Yeah.
This is kind of very involved, but it is just the only thing that I could come up with that provides a minimum security of singular digital personhood, because I just don't believe in the other approaches. Or I mean, with all the respect to the other approaches, they are a lot more user-friendly, but a lot less secure. And I think if we want the UBI to be significant, then the security is key. And in terms of fees, I mean, I think on the council, the discussion was also to have a payback for participation, so that you kind of on the bottom line don't really pay these fees. And with democracy, you could do that kind of, if you vote, you get back the fees under the condition that your sybil-defense has passed.
Yeah, of course. All right. Yeah, that answers my question. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Please raise your hands. I think no at the moment. Oh, Will, you have it again?
Yes, if there is no other question, then I will just throw a comment, because that's what comes to my mind, and maybe you want to react to that. Is From the question I asked and the answer you gave me, I still have the feeling that lots of points are still, I would say, experimental. This is, lots of things need to be validated, and we don't really know which way it's going to go. Will people participate? Is one of them. So basically, that brings me to the point of using a parachain, why not? Or a parathread, or whatever solution, like 100%. This is experimental. Kusama is experimental. There is absolutely no question about that. Now, to the question of should we assign a common good chain for this experiment, I start raising the question, basically. Don't we want to keep these slots for projects that will where we know they will end up somewhere, basically? And no offense in what I'm trying to say.
I completely get it.
Yeah, you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely, and I think it's a very valid concern. I mean, Encointer is innovating on so many fronts at once that it is absolutely unclear if it will be adopted, if it will be successful. I mean, I have no, I don't think I'm naive there, but it's just something that I believe has to be tried, because it's just a very kind of consequent approach to the problem at hand if you want to really decentralize. And I think it's a bit a chicken and egg thing. I mean, we could, as Encointer, also just start with a proof of authority chain and kind of first prove that the system works. I mean, that's kind of our plan B, right? But this is not very attractive for the story that we're telling about decentralization. So it's and well, I think we would have a lot more credibility if we could do that on a really decentralized network.
I see. And I want to mention, I do appreciate actually the honesty of what you're saying. I do prefer people to honestly say, I have no clue if this is going to work, but we want to try, and we are there to try. And people saying, you know what, we guarantee it's going to work, and this is bullshit under the hood. So I do want to mention that. And it's I don't want you to think that this is playing against you to think like this. I think it's something very nice, actually.
This is it was a very important concern, I think, and there are more questions. I mean, if you talk to an economist, they would raise even more concerns about why should such local currencies work at all if you issue a UBI out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And that's a research question that we are also tackling in parallel. But I mean, also there, I don't know. I just believe it can work.
Okay. So my takeaway, if I summarize what we just talked about, is in terms of fee, this is something to play with and it's something to experiment. I see the big blocker, and we talked about it already on Podcast Assembly about COVID and the issue people have to meet and will have to meet. This is a not a blocker, I would say, but that's definitely something on the way for the solution to work.
In terms of timing, yeah.
Yes. And and I think it's important to have, as you mentioned, plan Bs, to know ahead of time all the options we have and to see which one makes more sense, so that the experimentation can actually move on.
Cool.
Yeah.
Jam raised his hand again.
Yeah, I guess I had like another throwback to like a weird edge case that I hadn't considered until now, which is like, this is all about like giving people unique identity or like uniqueness, right? But it's all structured around local communities. So how does it interact with people who are very nomadic and move between communities quite often? Like, do they have to sell their community token and buy into the next one every time they move?
No, that's a good one. And that's kind of, we initially said equal opportunity. We don't care about your nationality or a proof of residence. That means if you are a nomad, then you just participate in this ceremony in Berlin, and in the next ceremony in Zurich, and then in Hong Kong. that is not an issue at all, because you will still have attended 3 of the last 3 ceremonies. So for the sybil-defense, this will not matter, but it could matter if you go to a community which might have a lower rating in the Web of Trust, because then kind of the trust of your verification would also be lower. And on the economical side, I mean, the upside is you get the UBI always in the currency where you are currently located. But I mean, if you mean nomadic in the sense of you change your location every week, then a local currency actually is not attractive for you in the first place. That just doesn't make sense.
Right, but what about the matters of like community voting and stuff? If like somebody's moving around, they would have very little voting power in many different communities, or
yeah, well, most probably I mean, this is to be defined by the community, but the community might require at least 3 of the last 5 ceremonies to vote at all, because it might be a matter which is more long term than just Or there might be, these kind of, I would say, rather lightweight questions. Shall we do this, or shall we do that party in in our community? And then you might just require 1 attendance, right? And then newcomers can vote as well. So that's up to the community to decide, and the matter at hand, obviously.
Okay, everyone. I think that's an hour. I apologize again for this small issue at the beginning. I will be editing that video so we can post this on bulk assembly, and we can continue on asking questions there. If anyone has any other questions now or in the future, they can post a question on bulk assembly on the post that we shared on the Direction channel. And I'll see you all soon. Thank you to Alan again for presenting and answering the questions.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.